Good evening, Mr. President.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to meet you.
So today we're going to address my new federal judiciary system because I think that there's far too many improvements and revisions that need to be made, so we're going to start over to be more effective. So a few things I'm going to address is splitting up the circuit courts and the U.S. Court of Appeals, and then the division of labor between the courts, and then the selection process of obtaining judges at the highest level, as well as the process that litigants go through in the trial court. Now switching over to the Supreme Court justices, recently Ruth Bader Ginsburg just passed away due to cancer, and this tragic event opened a spot up on the Supreme Court, which is a very important job to fulfill, being that there's only 9 Supreme Court justices in the U.S. So, Mr. Trump, you did just appoint Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court as a nominee, and the Senate on October 26th just confirmed the nomination only 8 days before the election, which I think is very too soon, and that there should be a rule or regulation that requires at least a 2-month time period in between the nomination and the confirmation from the Senate. This would allow for a more thoughtful consideration and a time for the public to comprehend the decision. So currently, the general public thinks that you're making decisions too quickly and you're not fully thinking about all of the possible effects that could happen in return. This also would lead to changing the perspective of some of your current supporters and fellow conservatives, which could lead to a drastic change in the upcoming presidential election. So next, on the topic of how the division of labor among the courts is unequal. So as an example, the International Court of Justice, or ICJ, has significantly departed from ignoring the jurisprudence developed by other international courts. This has led to a defer in factual findings and legal interpretations of specialized bodies such as the Human Rights Committee, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights. There has not been a major focus on this attention between the relationship between the International Court of Justice and the specialized courts. There needs to be an orderly division of labor among these international courts on the basis of a functional allocation. As your job as the president of our country, I feel that it's important for you to have good relations internationally because you're the person we go to and who is in charge of all the power and responsibility to make the best decisions for our country. So each court has their own power and set of tasks that they do on a daily basis, but some are more important than others. For instance, the Supreme Court decides which cases to hear, and these decisions have lasting effects on the U.S. These cases are ranked high in society, and the role of a Supreme Court justice is seen as high class compared to the role of somebody who works for the circuit or district courts. A role in the circuit or district courts still have some importance, but society views them differently, and they do just as much work as somebody in the Supreme Court. I think our community as a whole needs to be more informed of these courts and what they accomplish, because if they're like me, they only hear if a case reaches the Supreme Court on the news or television, but a small case in the district or circuit courts is never even talked about unless you actually work in the court system or you're personally involved with the case. You would never hear about it. This needs to change, and the general public needs to be more knowledgeable about our court system and what occurs and what roles are important, which is all of them, not just the ones in the Supreme Court. So lastly, at the trial court level, or court of first instance, is a court of original jurisdiction in which most civil or criminal cases occur. So evidence and testimony are first introduced, then received and considered. Findings of fact and law are made in the trial court and have the potential of being appealed to a higher court that has the power of review, which is the appellate court. Trial courts consist of both general jurisdiction and limited jurisdiction. A trial court of general jurisdiction may hear any civil or criminal cases that is not within a jurisdiction of another court. These cases only affect the people involved in the case. So when it comes to a criminal trial, I think change needs to be made when it comes to the justifications for punishment. Some of these justifications are retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, and rehabilitation. Federal court sentencing is also done by the judge. The judge has to sentence some kind of punishment. However, there needs to be more laws and regulations as to which punishment would be best for each case. There are too many cases where someone is wrongfully convicted and has to serve time for the crime they did not commit. Some judges usually have a type of punishment that they like to sentence more than others, which this should not be allowed. I'm suggesting that you seriously consider a sort of law where each judge has to comply and sentence people equally. Mr. President, it is imperative that you deliberate over my proposal for a new federal judiciary system. Change needs to be made and needs to happen now before our country's citizens start to lose their faith in our court system. We need to split up the circuit courts, have a time constraint when it comes to confirming the Supreme Court justices, and contemplate the division of labor among the courts at an international level. We also need to take into consideration a requirement for judges when it comes to deciding which punishment is the best fit. Overall, these changes would make a better federal judiciary system because it is improving the outdated system that we have stood by for centuries.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.